For a while there, the stories about Canada's troubled, fractious relationship with China dropped off the front pages. We had a little thing called LavScam that proliferated for a few months, was, let's just say, a big headache for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Well, the China spat is back on the front pages, and I think that's actually something of a good thing, because it's making us really reassess and challenge a lot of assumptions that the political class in Canada and throughout the West had about this emerging superpower. Just a few recent news stories show just how troubling the situation has become. The other night on CBC, our former ambassador to China, Guy Saint-Jacques, he said that he had heard that the government of China had been telling regional governments to compile lists of the Canadian firms they do business with, so they have a hit list of companies to go up against. This is all coming after our canola exports have effectively been banned. China is saying in a trumped-up way that there are pests in our canola. Therefore, they're unclean, they're unsanitary. They can't allow it to go to market in China. Now, we know that's bogus. We know that they know it's bogus. But so far, all Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has done is said, well, we're going to send a delegation there to say, oh, come on, there's not pests, it's clean, and so forth. So rather than call their bluff, he's almost kind of enabling and authenticating what they're saying and playing the game by their own rules. Plus, we have the newly breaking news that a second Canadian in China has been sentenced to death for drug dealing. Now, China already has pretty strict penalties for drug dealing, and they do dole out the death penalty in all of this, so it's hard to exactly figure out where this sits in the equation, but they maybe would have sentenced the person just to 10 or 15 years, as they do for some other people in this situation, rather than the death penalty, perhaps to show a signal, send a sign to Canada. All this brings us to the question of what do we do now? Well, Andrew Scheer had some proactive ideas about that. At a press conference on Monday, he said he was very frustrated with Justin Trudeau's weak response, and he proposed a number of measures, such as proposing bridge financing for canola farmers as they struggle to make it through this impasse. He also wants to see a World Trade Organization complaint waged against China for the canola issue, and he would like to see a new ambassador appointed to China. The position has been vacant since John McCallum stepped down. And his last one seems like maybe a technical one that caused a lot of regular Canadians who heard it probably to just their eyes gloss over. He called for Canada to withdraw its funds from the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Now, I think this is the most interesting one that Scheer put forward, and the one that we should be talking about and looking at the most. What is this infrastructure bank? Well, it's a thing that China started just a few years ago, where it's basically a development bank that funds infrastructure in the Asia-Pacific area. It's kind of like the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank. But here's the thing. It's led by China. Whereas those two global financial organizations, well, they're led by the United States and its allies and a broader sense of Western democracy and Western capitalism. You know, our values. And that's sort of what drives these banks and the businesses they do, the operations that they get up to. The Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank is a brainchild of the Chinese government, the Communist Party, and President Xi Jinping, who is very defiant and very certain about who he is and what he wants to accomplish. And let's just say it is not one that is all that compatible with Canadian values and Canadian views about Western democracy and so forth. So we are actually in this bank, even though the United States and Japan asked us not to join it. Now, initially we didn't join it under Stephen Harper. Stephen Harper said, no, we're going to take a pass on that. And we kind of balanced out the G7 because it was us, Japan, and the US who were not joining it, and then the other countries did join it. So you can say it was kind of even keel. Then Justin Trudeau got in, he turned a page, and him and Bill Morneau signed us up for the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And then they tilted it, and that pretty much put the G7 in favor. So basically the G7 signing up for a bank and kind of authenticating, giving the seal of approval to a bank that pretty much the express purpose of it is to supplant the United States as the world leader on these issues and to let China, the rising superpower, forge ahead with all of this. Do we want to be a part of this? We got $250 million in it, which, I mean, we don't want to be throwing that money around, but it's not that big of an amount of money in the grand scheme of things. That allows us to own 1% of the bank. China owns 30% of it, and other countries own 2%, 3%, 0.2%, about that much, and there are 70 companies that constitute the ownership of all of this. Now is the perfect time to be having the discussion about this bank, whether or not we want to stay in it, what we think about it, and really let Canadians know about it. Because Justin Trudeau made this decision, I'm not going to say behind closed doors, but we didn't have a national conversation about it. Yet it really does strike to what is the future of not just Canada, but the future of the world that we want for our children and for our grandchildren. Do we want to be signing up for institutions that basically acknowledge the dominance of China over the United States? I think I know the answer to that, and I hope a lot of Canadians would agree. Maybe it is time to reassess our membership in this bank.